Today we started off with regreening Africa, and in the theme of reimagining and restoring WA. And so we started big picture, and the message was, think big. We've got to think big. Our lives depend on thinking big. In the middle, we've had a whole heap of that jigsaw puzzles of everybody who's working like mad to do the best they can in their patches, and they're really inspiring. And we've had a whole heap of really great examples of how to engage our young people, and a real desire for that to happen. And also how important it is to do that work, to get that the dirt underneath your fingernails, because it builds hope and it's bloody good for our health. And what we've come full circle is how important it is to think big. So I think it's like a whole sort of a big sandwich today, a big think big sandwich. And so that's where we've come to. It is the Danju Kulin, and Christy was really emphasising exactly that same message, and about that complexity. And if we don't have human and ecosystem health happening simultaneously, we're on some other planet. So I just wanted to ask each one of you, just to, while people are getting their thinking caps on, just the power of hope. For you, you know, what's going on for you with regard to hope, which is a high motivator, and I can hear it really in all of you.
So very much an Indigenous lens to my response then, is Indigenous, it's not anymore about consultation or engagement, it's participation. And people, community, and Indigenous and Western, European, whatever you want to call it, want to partner to manage country, and and realising that humans have to be part of that mix. Doesn't matter whether you're black, brindle, white, whatever. We've got to be part of that mix. We're not separate from it. So country needs people. Campaign that Pew and others running is so true. You can't remove the mob, the pastoralist, the farmer, the person living in Netherlands from the mix. They've all got a contribution to make, and yes, with the climate change crisis at our doorstep, if not already in the door, people are beginning to wake up. So yeah, I think we've got a rough road ahead, but there's light in there that will be good, and particularly for Indigenous Australians, we will close some of the gaps, and our voice will become much stronger, and people will pay attention to that.
Thanks, Stephen. I think what my hope was being that we're not the only ones spreading the message, and it was great that I had that happen today. And the message too with what we're talking about with Danju is very much the same, is that we need to care for everything for us to continue to live in the space that we have, because it is a bleak, dark space if we don't. And, we've got to be really open to change the way we all work. It's not just around giving us the opportunity for the respect for two-way knowledge and practice. It's how we've got to, each and every one of us, is let go of the learnings that we had and take on the new. Because I had a really powerful opportunity to be a part of the launch of the two-way science initiative that's just developed at Baldiva Senior College, and I thought about all the things that we're asking for around listen to us, work with us, hear us, and to see that inside a school, which 20 schools will be a part of that initiative initially, but we want it for everyone. And I think it's coming, but It's not coming fast enough. So my hope is that the silos break down, we embrace each other, our knowledge, experience, and the pathway forward, that the recognition of listening to those small land care groups, it's not just your passion and your energy that's happening, you're contributing to the bigger picture that everyone recognises, that everyone celebrates for caring for what we all love.
What gives me hope is that the conversation is broadening out from the fragments and looking at the culture and the heart sets and the mindsets, and the conversations including what are the barriers, and it's inside people, and no one has all of the answers themselves, but the conversation's also about that, just having that goal and then putting it out there and saying it out loud. We've got the courage to do that, and if we do, who knows where the answers will come from. So the hope I get is that a lot of people imagine the worst and then imagine the best and then just go for it. Say it out loud, let's do this courageously.
That's a really interesting question, particularly as an ecologist and a young person, because it's really difficult, really, really difficult to have very much hope when you see not a lot of reason for it. I think one of the really positive things is that there is a broad shift, or a beginning of a broad shift in a general public ignorance previously, particularly around things like, let's set fire to every shred of bush that we have left because fire is bad, and let's just keep doing that the way we've always done it. And, the perception of nature being something scary, that we've had people tell us things like, my backyard is a no-fly zone, and they're talking about black cockatoos because they don't like the fact that they make noise early in the morning, or they cut down branches. That ignorance is shifting, and we're now seeing that, yes, this is a room where you're preaching to the converted of people who understand the importance of land care and nature and things like that, but it's now beginning to trickle out of these kind of small areas into the broader public, and when it goes as a wave into the broader public, that's when we're going to see these kind of changes at the scales that we need.
Some questions, comments from you? Yep. Cool. Go.
Bruce Ivers is my name, and I take school kids tree planting. I'd like to start by thanking all four of you for your presentations this afternoon. It's been fabulous to hear the passion that you have for what you do. And Christy, I'd like to zero in on you a little bit, because I know a little bit of your backstory. And can you tell us a little bit about the practical work you've done on your farm to try and be carbon neutral? And more to the point, thinking into the future, how do you think your farming practices will change to be a more sustainable farm in future?
Is this on? Yeah. Well, so many practices, but not enough is the short answer. And going forward, I think we really, really need to understand climate projections a lot more, and what is going to be possible on our land. Our summer has already expanded so much, and you have the climate has always been like this. It's very variable, but now it's more so. So the kinds of practices we want to do more of, say, the biodiverse plantings, or summer cropping or whatever. They'll get harder because it's drier and hotter for longer. So, but there's still, the future's still going to be there, and we've still got to be happy in it somehow. So I'm relying on the geniuses in ecology and all of the knowledge everywhere to make something beautiful there. We know that the climate bands have already moved over 100 kilometres, and they'll move further. And so rather than thinking precisely what I can do now, I'm working in the space of trying to get the right people together to have that conversation about what do we do next, what's going to, we plant trees all the time every year and a lot of them die, whatever, you keep trying. But if we knew what communities of things to plant that would be fine in 30 years' time, 50 years' time, you'd feel a lot better about doing that. And that goes against what you used to feel like. When I first came to the farm, it was like, we've got to plant exactly what's here. We need the provenances from around here and all that kind of stuff. And, you still feel kind of like that and you want to be like that. But you've also got to face the reality that things aren't moving fast enough. There will be more change. And we just have to face up to that, fight it as much as we can, but still plan for the future. You asked about carbon neutrality, so you helped me with some figures there. So on our 1,500 hectares with our current emissions, we're not carbon neutral now, so it's about 500 tonnes of emissions to grow about 1 million loaves of bread for you all and meat and wool and stuff. So if we plant about 60 to 70 more hectares, that should cover our own emissions. All of the revegetation we've done in the past has been tallied up and used by Australia to offset all of those other emissions. So if we want to claim carbon neutrality in any official sort of way, we have to go to the expense of registering with the Clean Energy Regulator and go through all that hoo-ha to then be able to pay for the audits to come back and say, yeah, you're carbon neutral. So it's a big process. So I don't know if we'll get there by 2030, but I'm going to give it a good try. So the human thing, lots of conversations with my husband about, because he's a dyed-in-the-wool farmer, and he says to me he's glad when I push the envelope. I'm only copying his good work. It's he and his dad started all the land care, but I'm pushing it a bit further. And anyway, so human conversations as well. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer.
There was another question right there.
Thank you. Greg from 2J. My question is for Adam. Adam, should we be imagining the Australian landscape and ecology before humans came here? I mean, humans have been here for 60,000 or 70,000 years, which is only a blink of the eye in terms of ecological timescale. Do we need to be thinking about what the ecology was before humans arrived and started changing the ecology?
Maybe? Yes, there we go. Absolutely. Yes, with regard to some management practices, yes. And the first and a personal bugbear to me is fire management. Absolutely, we need to be going back to paradigms of fire management that are not just, let's burn everything we can see. The next best thing is Indigenous-led and managed fire management. That still doesn't go beyond that point, but the problem is that it's very difficult with anything that's a dynamic process to go back beyond when humans were here, because we simply don't know what it was. With things like botany, where we can use paleo records to determine historical compositions or species distributions or climatic records, etc., then we've got a little bit of a luxury to work in that space. In some areas, it's reasonable to try and aim for a historical point. Restoration as a discipline, as a field, has come a long way in the last 30 years from, dyed in the wool, let's put back some particular kind of ecosystem that we've got a historical record for, and only those species, and only from this area, etc., etc. It's now developed into a much more dynamic, understandable, flexible thing where the idea of a reference ecosystem, for example, can be something from 4,000, 8,000 years ago. And there's some really interesting rewilding projects from Northern Europe that are trying to explore some of those. Now, rewilding as a concept has some flaws, but it's worth exploring. The problem is we can't put back ecosystems without the context of humans, because we're here now. And unfortunately, we as a society, as a people, put us at the top of the pyramid. And particularly when you're talking about broader social change, we're not going to get a situation realistically where we can say, for example, everyone in the Wheatbelt, bugger off, that whole area is now going to be restored back to pre-human, pre-Western society, and you're just going to have to find somewhere else to live. Least of all, because where are the seeds for that going to come from, and can we actually even prove that we can do it at that scale? But
Yeah, I'm just going to add some to Adam's there. The other thing is, in that, we need to be put a lens of reality on it as where we are now. So if we were to rehab the wheat belt, there's a whole series of ecosystem engineers that are extinct. And so the functioning of it is never going to be back to what it was pre-European settlement. And then even if we can get it back with the vegetation and the plant world, the great plant world, we've got a 10-year bureaucratic system where Indigenous burning is such a challenge, because I don't want smoke over my grapes. I don't want your fire coming onto my patch, so you need this much insurance. Well, how's a small Indigenous ranger group going to afford that insurance? Out of the Black Summer bushfires over in Eastern Australia, the insurance flow on from that is now meaning Kimberley Land Council can't pay their insurance bill to do their burning, because it's gone up 300% to nearly $1 million just to pay the insurance on their ranger teams against fire. We need to rethink how, even if we can get the vegetation back, how are we going to manage it across a complex, dissected landscape?
I think that's one of the key reasons why we've got the Reimagine, because I don't think we're going to go back to something that was, because it's been highly modified. And so I think it's collectively us going, okay, what can it look like, particularly in the face of climate change, which, as Christy was outlining, is going to be impacting for many years into the future. So it's not just a deal with the current emissions, it's actually the implications for decades, actually, that we'll have a modified landscape. And actually we need human beings right in that landscape, better managing it. So I think it's that collective task is really about reimagining. Other questions, comments?
Thanks everybody for this afternoon. This is apropos of human health. And I'm wondering whether in your field, Adam, you've discussed or considered the low level environmental distress disorder that most of us suffer when we see native vegetation desecrated or even ripped along the roadside verge. We don't even see trees being treated respectfully when they're being pruned in a lot of cases. Where the we've seen recently in 2J our roadside verge disappear along a section of road that's been redone. And a lot of us have felt literally sick on the stomach. It's having a very physiological effect on a lot of us. And I think it's accumulated, and I think it's low level across anyone with a shred of environmental feeling or compassion. And of course we saw it this afternoon. You topped it off just nicely, Christy, when you said, we're going to lose all of this. It is a disorder which we're not paying any attention to, and the government hasn't even started considering it as a public health issue. But as we go further into the environment of climate change, it's going to become more prominent. Have you discussed that huge cohort of people across the world that are suffering that at the moment, as we saw visibly, and we're still seeing visibly in 2J? We're not alone, we know.
It's a part of the discourse, but the problem is that anything that involves mental ill health, A, is extremely difficult to study because you need ethics approvals, which can take a year or more, and anytime you even want to go and talk to someone in the context of a research program, you need a great many approvals. what I will say is that there is a growing understanding of why that happens. And I know exactly what you mean. I drove out to Kokobee in the Wheatbelt the other day, and you drive through beautiful national park and then you get to nothingness. And it's a visceral sensation. And I can only imagine, I probably can't even begin to imagine that sensation for traditional owners of these landscapes as well. Why it's such a visceral sensation is that our coevolution with these ecosystems has left a biological memory with us. So we look at landscapes, and there's a reason why if you look at a picture of, as a Western person, a Caucasian person, if you look at a picture, say, of Scotland, right, that'll elicit a very specific kind of response in you that a photo of, say, a forest in South America will not elicit. But complex landscapes, freshwater, areas to hide, areas that might have food, mountains, places of refuge, complexity in ecosystems is a thing that innately biologically to us means that's a good place for survival. You can hide from predators, you can find things that you can eat, you can forage for various resources. When you see landscapes that are the opposite of that, when you see barren, salt-affected country, where you see vegetation that's been smashed apart by, I wouldn't say it was pruning, but yeah, a spinning blade 6 feet long on the side of it. Yeah, when you see these kinds of landscapes that are essentially just completely disabled, destroyed, what you're getting is a fear response. You're getting a biological anxiety-induced fear response, and there is no way of controlling that because it is just pathways, endocrine, etc., of how our body is terrified of what it's seeing. Why nature elicits many of those positive beneficial responses is through exactly those same pathways. It goes, I want to go to that place because that's great for me to live. When you see these other areas, it's going, I'm terrified of that place. I want to go as far away from it as I possibly can because if I go there, I'm going to die. Of how our body, of what it's seeing. Why nature elicits many of those responses is through exactly those same pathways. It goes, I want to go to that. I think that's a question that's probably better answered by someone who's got a longer cultural connection with the land.
I guess that's been a big part of where we've been working at it from, is that in many of the roles we've all had in our jobs, we've seen where policies and legislation has not worked, has disenabled us to do a lot of things together. So the hope, I guess, comes back to that hope question too, and I think we hope that we start getting people's hearts and minds to connect, and that they're not just in the role they're in for the role they're in, and that they start thinking about the shift they need to make to allow many things to happen that's going to fix and do things the right way.
Do you want to add something to
I was
that,
going to
Stephen?
say,
Go.
it's also where, as humans are a heterogeneous mob, and how we measure well-being is a real challenge. Human well-being, not health so much as well-being, and then that varies with so many people. And then on the road verge one, the biggest membership group in Western Australia is the RAC. They've got a policy: get rid of trees, because cars run into trees or trees jump out in front of cars. So that's the biggest membership group in WA of anything. That's that'd be a good place to start our lobbying, influencing, of getting the RAC to adjust their policies a bit to stop putting pressure on main roads and everybody else to remove trees off the road verge.
Do you know, that's another really great idea today. Can we just give Stephen a hand for that?
Wayne Clark from, dare I say, 2J again. But I'm speaking on behalf of the conserving the Avon River environment, we've talked about roadways and everything today, but the waterways are something also that are really suffering, and the Avon River is no longer considered a river, because when there's money for the Swan, but when the Swan gets up as far as the Wooroloo Brook confluence, it then becomes the Avon, and then it's no man's land as far as funding goes, because who funds it? Is it the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation? Is it the Department of Biodiversity and Attractions? No one's, it's just not funded anymore. So the Conserving the Avon River environment are really perplexed about what we're going to do to try and save that river, because 70% of the nutrients coming into the Swan come from the Avon.
You're nodding. You've got a mic. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I don't know what we can. Yeah, we know that. I guess how we can change that, I've got no ideas. In a year's time, we'll have National Landcare Program version 3.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where we can bang a few heads and get some funding for, issues like that. But again, it's going to come. A lot of that will be driven by grassroots complaining to their politicians, or complaining to Canberra that the funding's not going to the right place. And I'll just NLP2. I'm on the expert panel reviewing NLP2, and that's one of the biggest issues. People are telling us the on-ground priorities are not aligned with the Commonwealth's priorities, and that's where that disjunction's occurring.
So it's really good to know some of the people who are there, because I was mentioning early on that NLP2 review, and that it has influence because it determines where money flows to support. In the state government, there is a state NRM framework, and I know that there is internal advocacy work happening to get an actual plan to say, well, how do we work together to do work in Western Australia? So letting you know that certainly is underway, and we're all, WA Landcare Network is putting up their hand and saying, we want to be part of it. We need to be sitting around the table and letting you know how we want to work across WA. So that goes back to you, Carol.
Just one of the things that just going on from the Avon River, with how we talk with DUA and others, is that it's one river, one watercourse system, and our waterways are all connected for all part of us. The tributaries that run everywhere, all the water is connected, and we're trying to get them to understand that, and it's really been quite rewarding in their review of their the waterways policy, that they've taken some of that stuff on board. So that's been a real shift for us. But when we speak to them, we say that waterway is one river. So we've been pushing that for some time, and that's what the old people, we're not just saying it's as part of what we've done. Brother Neville and others have been saying this stuff for 20, 30 years around caring for our waterways. So I think we are hopefully that we're shifting that, because we're not just talking, and I think in our presentation we had a visual there of the Fitzroy River. So we've even had a invitation with them to join the campaign to save the Fitzroy River, because what's happened here is going to happen up there in a far extreme way than what we've seen. But because we've got the population here, and they'll use it as part of the irrigation and capture of water, that changes the flow of many things. So I guess it's a statewide campaign. What we all need to be a part of is all of our waterways, all of our bilia is all connected up for one.
I think that there was a question right here.
Don Poynton, I represent Coast Care Group from the northern suburbs. Actually, my question was going to be very much along the lines of what was just discussed. We're talking about restoration, and particularly if you live away from the coast, what hope have we got if we don't have water? To me, we can have plants, but if you don't have water, you don't have anything. So are we really being realistic in 50 years' time if we don't have water, if we're doing all this for nothing?
Yeah, I don't think many people know either that, you know, our water system we drink through is 50% run through desal. You know, so we that's what we're living in now. This is the environment we're already in.
Look, we're running out of time here. Just a short.
Much, folks. Look, I just wanted to make one comment, and you know, Carol, you and I have been talking about these things for a very long time together. The fact of the matter is, governments care very little about anything but economics, and so what we need is for somebody, whether it's that handsome gentleman on the end there or whoever, we need. Sorry, Steve, I was looking at you too. What we need is some very clever people to do some economic modelling of what it will cost to not do this. In other words, what are the multiple social blah, 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 blah consequences which work out into these things here, into dollars? What will the consequences, what is that? Because in honesty, I've dealt with this for a very long time and they do not listen to any of the perfectly logical arguments we've heard today. All they care about is economics. So if we can get somebody to step into that stream with knowledge, I think we've got a chance, maybe.
I may just add something super quickly before the guy at the back who's been waiting a while can ask his question. One example of where exactly that is trying to be undertaken is in the US at the moment, where there has been great debate around non-biological methods of carbon sequestration. Our group, in conjunction, the EHN, in conjunction with some other groups, actually ran the math on what was being proposed, and in brief, to artificially sequester carbon at the scale that is currently being proposed in the United States, remembering that carbon is a physical entity and needs to be put somewhere, would require nearly double the current entire electrical grid of the entire United States and South America in its totality to run, but also you would need to cover the entire state of Dakota to a depth of 1 metre in pure carbon to store it somewhere. So the economics behind what some of these global giants are actually pushing on us and the reality of what it would actually look like are impossibilities.
No last questions.
Thank you. Rick Newman, I'm a Wheatbelt farmer. Constantly asked, because of the colour of my hair probably, why I don't sell the farm and retire to the coast or the city. The answer is exactly what you were on about, Adam. I wake up every morning in the midst of 400 acres of natural bush on my Wheatbelt farm. And I intend to keep it that way. The panel made the following comments. You talked about participation, spread the message, broadening the conversation and shifting public ignorance. I think political ignorance is one of the big things that we need to do. I investigated years ago the idea of revegetating the eastern wheat belt, which is not going to be good for anything in another 10 years' time. It was pointed out to me there are no votes out there, so politicians wouldn't listen. There are now even less, as of yesterday. There are no votes out there, so it won't happen. But what the CSIRO research showed, that the quickest way to impact on climate change in Western Australia is to destock the rangelands. There's no conversation about that. None at all, no leadership. I'll make a quick comment about water. If the rain that fell on Wheatbelt Farmers' sheds was all captured, they'd be totally self-sufficient in water. That's been proven. And yet the government changed its policy on encouraging farmers to do that 5 years ago. I'd just like to congratulate you all and say what a wonderful day it has been. And Christy, as far as the farming community is concerned, love your passion, and I, for one, am trying to spread the message. I'm involved with Avongrow, the Australian Sandalwood Network, and I'm fighting my local shire about local ecological and roadside vegetation. Thank you.